We are pretty excited to launch our first of the series, Salt Office Hours. This is one of the many more to come. And let's get started. So the idea for the office hours is that we would do a meeting once per month. And this is an opportunity for the Salt core team and Tom to interact with the community, get your feedback, and basically answer the top questions that you. The first 10 or 15 minutes in each of these calls will spend in doing some of the major Salt announcements. And most of the rest of all the time is meant for the question and answers and to get your feedback. The current plan is that we would meet the first Tuesday of every month at 11 Mountain Time, but I've received some feedback that this might be a little late for the Europe folks. So we're looking to move this a couple of hours back. So do let us know if we met at 9 Mountain Time, would that work for you? And we are taking into account the European holidays and also the US national holidays. And if that happens to fall in the first Tuesday of the month, then we would move it to an. So quickly on what's covered in today's call. This is the first kickoff for the office hours. I'll be talking a little bit about the community highlights. And then Tom, who's joining us today, will announce working groups. And that's something exciting that we've been working towards. And Wayne, who's a Salt core team member, will talk about Salt enhancement proposals. And we should be done with all of these announcements in the first 10-15 minutes. And then we'll start taking questions from the. So this is a little highlight of what the Salt community is all about. The numbers really speak for themselves. They're pretty impressive. One of the impressive stats here is number of commits to contributor ratio. 37:1. That shows that each of the Salt core team, Salt community members, they've been extremely pivotal to the Salt project, and they've helped guide the Salt project. So we also want to take some time to call out the top contributors for the Salt in the past year. I'll read out their first names and the Alberto, Cedric, Christian, Ethan, Jamie, Marcus, Kramer, Elkip, Matt, Michael, Mircha, Pablo, Shi, and Slavik, and Tom. Thank you for each and every one of you played a great role in steering the Salt project in the right direction. And have your continued support in the Salt project. So hand it over to Tom to talk about the working groups.
All right, now we're going to be introducing working groups. Now, we introduced working groups a couple of years ago, and we had a hard time getting them off the ground. Now, a few years ago when we introduced working groups, the intent was really to just create a communicative forum, right, where we have regular meetings with people interested in specific topics that are being worked on inside of the SALT project. But this time we wanted to make these working groups dramatically different. We wanted to look at this from, well, frankly, a very different perspective. As we step back and we look at the SALT project and we look at SaltStack, the company, there have been some very dramatic shifts over just the last 6 months. SaltStack, the company, has been able to release a number of new products. We've had dramatic management shifts internally, and we've been able to push different philosophies through management when it comes to open source in general. And so there's some things that I'm very, very excited about here. So the purpose of this working group initiative is far less to do with just creating a communicative forum. The purpose of this working group is very explicitly to bring the open source community and contributor community more deeply into the development of SALT and control of the SALT project. So what we're looking at in these working groups is a new structure that highlights 3 different specific roles. Working groups are going to be sectioned off into subsections of SALT's own code base. Now we're going to start with working groups for at least Windows and networking. And then we're going to follow that up with more working groups if, assuming that we can captains who feel that they would be capable and excited to take on that role. And we've got a form for you to sign up for working groups that specifies that you can sign up for the Windows working group, the networking working group. We're suggesting a cloud working group and an SSH working group, but you can also enter any other working groups that you think would be beneficial. Now, the working groups are going to have 3 different types of roles per group. And those roles are captain, participant, and facilitator. Now, a working group captain is going to be voted for and then to a specific release. And then that working group captain will take the reins of that release as soon as the release before it gets branched. So let me walk through this situation. We're working on the Neon release right now. As soon as the Neon release goes into code and the Neon branch is created, then the working group captains that have at this point been elected will take their position as working group captains for their area of the code preparatory to the release following Neon, which will be Sodium. And so Sodium will be the first release which we have fully empowered working group captains. These working group captains are going to be in charge of shepherding new features for their respective area. So a working group captain for networking, for instance, would be in charge of things like SALT proxy, but also enhancements to specific devices and different feature sets that they feel can be beneficial. Since we're giving that working group captain a release, we feel that gives that working group captain a complete cycle for the ideation, development, and rollout of the features that they feel are going to be best for the project. And so let me talk a little bit about the working group's timeline and how we have a bit of a challenge around overlap. If a captain begins as soon as the developed branch is available for them to start putting features in, then they are overlapping functionally with the previous release's working group captain, which means that for the Sodium release, we will have a working group captain for Windows and networking, hopefully for a few other groups as well. And that the working group captain, again, will be captain for that release. Then before we get to a feature freeze on the Sodium release, we're going to hold the election for the next release's working group captains, which would be Magnesium. And so those Magnesium captains begin as captains for Magnesium as soon as that release is made available. All right, the things that we're going to begin with asking the captains to do is that we are going to have a facilitator from SaltStack set up and arrange meetings for these working groups. Those captains are asked to attend and run those meetings. The captains are going to be given merge rights to the SALT repo, and the captains will be given voting rights on SALT enhancement proposals. Let me double check my notes and see if I'm missing anything on captains. So since captains are given merge powers to the SALT repo, they will be able to merge any pull request which has been sufficiently reviewed and approved. Hopefully that means that those captains will be able to accelerate our ability to merge in new code as well as being able to continue to ensure the overall quality of the project moving forward. Next, we have working group participants. Working group participants are basically people who attend the monthly working group meetings because they are interested in the proceedings of this feature set inside of SALT. Participants are encouraged to work on the things that, work on the feature sets that they are part of, but we aren't necessarily giving participants power. As we move forward, if we have participants who are exceptionally active, then we will allow the captain to lobby back to the core team and the other captains. They want to give greater powers to that participant. And so if a captain has a participant who is amazing or quite reasonably a former captain or active, then it would be perfectly reasonable for us to bring them into what will soon be the community advisory board. The community advisory board members will also have merge rights relative to when a PR has been properly approved. And that community advisory board will also have votes on SALT enhancement proposals. The last role that I want to talk about is the facilitator. Right now, the facilitator is going to be Kavya from SaltStack. Moving forward, we may move that position around within the SaltStack company. The main reason why we want to start with a facilitator from SaltStack is so that from a management perspective, we can ensure that these meetings are always happening. We want to make sure that this gets off on the right foot. Moving forward, after a few releases, we're going to reconsider whether or not the facilitator needs to be someone within SaltStack or if that can be extended to a member of the community who would at that point have most likely been a captain multiple times and a member of the community advisory board. Let me see if I've missed anything in my overall layout of this situation. I think that we're pretty good. So what this means is that we have this form, the link to which you can see the tiny URL there, that we're going to ask people to go and apply to be captains. And then once we have applications in for the captains, then the SALT core team is going to vote on who they feel these captains should be. And again, for the next election, captains as well as community advisory board members will be able to vote on who future captains will be. So the goal being that we begin with the nucleus of core developers that we have on the project, and that we are then able to expand that core. And that we're able to do it in a careful, reasonable fashion so that we don't get instantly overwhelmed by let's see, did I miss anything? Okay.
Do we have any more questions on the working group? Or if you have any feedback, feel free to send it in the chat box, or you can leave your comments in the Slack.
Okay, I think I'm handing it over to Wayne now, right?
So before
I'm
that,
handing this over to Kavya. My bad.
So before that, we wanted to quickly talk about some of the upcoming meetups. For those of you who are local to Utah, on May 16th, Python at the Point, a local meetup group. Tom will be speaking to the group about contributing to open source with Salt. The details can be found at the Python at the Point, the link which I've shared here. So now, actually hand over to, before moving on, we actually hand over to Wayne.
Yeah, so we're going to ask Wayne to talk a little bit about the new SALT enhancement proposal process, how that's coming along, and how we want to continue to expand that moving forward.
Hey, all right. So the the salt enhancement proposal process is something that's kind of grown. We realized that our previous path using RFCs within the main salt repository was just kind of getting lost in the noise and a little bit confusing. So we pulled that out into its own repository, the salt enhancement proposal repo under SaltStack, and then renamed it Salt Enhancement Proposals, both to clarify what it was that we really wanted out of this, as well as a nod to Python's PEP process. Our first test of the salt enhancement process was to actually create the salt enhancement proposal process. And it's pretty straightforward. Anyone who has the desire and the time can create a SEP. And the proposals will have an initial comment period of at least 2 weeks. If the proposal has a lot of lively discussion, or if it's discovered that the proposal needs to change and be adjusted, that initial comment period can last even longer as needed. After the 1 week initial comment or 2 week initial comment period, then it enters a 1 week final comment period, which is kind of a speak now or forever hold your peace time. And once that week is up, then it's time for voting. As defined in the SEP process, it needs to have 5 votes to be approved. Currently, that's limited to the SALT core team, but as Tom's mentioned, as we elect working group captains, they'll get voting rights. And some of the SEPs that we currently have accepted are one about change logs and updating our change log format to keep in line with the keepachangelog.com format, with the idea that change logs are meant for human consumption. I think in the past, people have missed information in our change logs. So this is a way to kind of prove that, so we can, as you're checking through the change logs before you upgrade your SALT installations, hopefully you should find the breaking changes a lot quicker, so you're not surprised after you update your code base. We also realized that some of our initial statuses for the SEP process was not, we didn't have statuses quite clear enough, so we used the SEP process to enhance the SEP process and add a few more statuses there. We've also got one for retiring Python 2 support. That's going to happen within the Sodium or later release, as you can read about in the SEP. There's also one for remote client to unify the SALT API and command line SALT endpoints. Right now, you can use something like Pepper to connect to the SALT API, but there's no way, if you have SALT API masters as well as just regular SALT masters, to run to use one tool to communicate with both of those. So this is a proposal to create that. So SEPs aren't necessary for bug fixes. It's also not necessary for minor features, especially if most end users won't notice what changes it is. But if we're making big changes, we will require SEPs for those. So things like dropping Python 2 support and creating a new command line client. If you're interested in the SEP process, you can go to the repository. I saw somebody posted a link to that in the chat. So you can go click on the watch button in the GitHub repository, or you can also join the SEP channel in the community Slack, where we announce new SEPs and when they've entered the final comment period. So I think that's about all I've got for SEPs right now. So Kavya, I'll turn the time back to you.
Thanks, Wayne. So now we'll open it for question and answers. So I'll read out one of the first questions I received on email from Jeff. His question was, how many paid developers work in SaltStack Enterprise versus SaltStack Open Source?
So I can field that question. Right now, we have 14 engineers working on SaltStack Enterprise, and we have 12 dedicated engineers working on SaltStack Open. So let's see, what was the next one?
Awesome. The next question was, what are the biggest features you see coming down the line in both SaltStack Enterprise and Open Source in 2019?
So let me start with Enterprise. SaltStack Enterprise, a lot of our focus has turned to creating and delivering high-level security features. So many of you have probably noticed that SaltStack Enterprise recently released SecOps, and that entire graphical workflow for managing SecOps from a systems compliance perspective. As we move forward, we're currently working on a similar approach to vulnerability management, where we have a UI and API-based approach to automatically remediate vulnerabilities, as well as detect vulnerabilities, as well as asset discovery and filling out kind of a CMDB approach, where we've got a little different design that we want to look at there. When we come back to Salt on open source, a lot of what I see our immediate focus on is being able to make the transition into the community more. The Salt is more of a community managed project. When I come back and I look at SaltStack's involvement, a lot of what I want our focus to be for the Neon and Sodium releases is not only increasing stability and increasing the overall maintainability of the product, but excuse me, I also want to see a significantly higher focus around networking and network device support. We also want to see a higher focus around improving our SSH support. And there's a number of things inside of reactors that I also want to see more focus around. So building out beacons in a deeper way. But another one of the big reasons why we wanted to create these working groups is so that we could shift from SaltStack being the sole definer of what that roadmap is into being more of a community collaboration, so that we can sit down with those who are dedicating resources into the project and help determine an overall community roadmap. And so as we come out with these working groups, the definition of specific roadmaps is something that we need to come back and present inside of an SEP, so that we're able to present and determine what sort of process we want to have moving forward along those lines.
Austin Papp has a question in the chat. He says there's a strong push for enterprise in SaltStack's business model. What is the timeline for enterprise functionality becoming fully available and documented to open?
We do not currently have a timeline to release our proprietary code in the open. Now, there have been a number of enhancements made to Salt to support the needs of our enterprise product, but we do not currently have a timeline to release our enterprise software in the open.
And he also asks, for organizations with thousands of networking devices, addressing proxies at scale.
So right now we do have the enterprise option of having the enterprise proxy, which is a proxy that allows you to have more proxies addressed under one single process. Now, with that said, I will admit that there is an ongoing debate internally as to how that particular feature will be managed source-wise in the future. I don't have a final statement there, but there's a much better chance that we will see that released eventually.
Okay. Got another one from Nick Gard. It says, I'm interested in the way testing is performed with Salt. It looks like there's movement towards PyTest. If that's right, what are the goals and expectations?
Is Pedro on the call? Hey, Pedro, are you there?
Yes, I am.
You think you can field that one?
Yes, for sure. So to address that question off the bat, yes, we are moving to PyTest. What are our goals with the move to PyTest? Those who are acquainted with the tool for sure know that it's way more powerful than what we currently use. Behind that switch to PyTest, there's also our will and our switch to a functional approach to testing as opposed to an integration testing as we have now. And I'll explain why. Right now, we have thousands of tests. I believe we are around 9,000 or even 10,000 on the develop branch. And each of those tests go through the communication protocol. And that adds a fair chunk of time to the test suite. The move to functional testing, and let's not confuse that to unit testing, is to test parts of Salt by themselves. So test Salt states alone, the functions, test Salt modules alone, the functions, returners, outputters, anything pluggable that we have, but at a function level, without the communication protocol in the way. The move to PyTest will greatly facilitate those kind of tests, and it will even simplify the way that we actually write tests for Salt, which has been some users have struggled to write tests for Salt. So also on our goal list is to make that simpler for new contributors to add tests to their features or to their fixes in a simpler way. So to sum up, we are moving to PyTest only on the develop branch. Doing so on other branches was decided that it would be too intrusive and it would delay releases. So it's targeted for the develop branches. We are stabilizing the whole test suite across the branches to reach to that stage so that we are in an all-green scenario according the test suite across all branches. And besides switching to PyTest, we will be switching the way we are testing Salt. So from an integration perspective to a more functional perspective. Hopefully that addresses the question. If not, fire away.
So we have a question about SaltStack SSH. When looking at a specific competitor who can do SSH and WinRM, having the same functionality in SaltStack would likely help get more people to adopt SaltStack. Are there any plans to support WinRM?
There certainly are. Now, we've actually created internally some beta code around WinRM, but we've been a little worried about what the long-term maintainership of that code looks like. Once we're able to get an SSH working group, and we know that we've got ample community support around that.
Yeah, I guess this is kind of a follow-up to Pedro's. He says, is there some potential to use the PyTest work in testing Salt populous states as a part of the CI process?
I can also chime in on that one. Yes, I did forgot one aspect of PyTest, and probably an even more important aspect. The move to PyTest will also facilitate testing Salt states, Salt modules that are not part of Salt core. What this means is if you are developing a state module or a state function that you don't want to release in the core that you're using in your company, using PyTest will allow you to still add tests around that code. PyTest, one of the PyTest goals is also to allow to test state trees. For example, there are a lot of companies that have huge state trees, and moving to PyTest will facilitate testing these external pieces of code or states. So will it facilitate in a CI process? Yes, for sure.
Okay. Thanks, Pedro. One more from Sanjay Mathan. Are there any plans on Salt Enterprise to show performance metrics on job executions and apply analytics to detect potential enterprise-related issues when scaling?
There definitely are. I'll admit that those are not in the immediate roadmap, but we definitely want to be able to take some of the master metrics. So if we kind of look down the whole pipe there, right? As we move forward, some of the things that we're planning on adding to enterprise have to do with being able to not only get a more of a CMDB-like view of all of your assets that are inside of an infrastructure, but also be able to visualize things like long-term performance trends, and be able to take stats directly out of the Saltmaster itself and display those, as well as stats around the performance of the enterprise systems. And so we definitely have that on the roadmap. It's a little further out, but that's also something we'd be very open to ongoing feedback for.
What are the current plans for the future of Salt Cloud functionality?
So what we want to do for Salt Cloud is, one, form a working group and understand what members of the community are interested in Salt Cloud. Now, if we step back and we look at Salt Cloud from an overall architectural perspective, I started making Salt Cloud back in the day when you looked at cloud primarily as exposing compute resources. And so the challenge that we ran into is that Salt Cloud itself is still functionally tied to that paradigm. Now, Salt Cloud as a whole became extended into a number of execution and state modules that are able to then subsequently control numerous aspects of the clouds themselves. To be honest, what I want to do with Salt Cloud is gauge community interest and engagement, because it's the sort of task that would take some serious lift. I want to sit down with the person that is willing to be the Salt Cloud captain, and I want to go over what our long-term options really are. I certainly believe that SaltStack's model around management and SaltStack's model around exposing and working with interfaces should allow us to build a superior cloud management platform. But to do that, I think that we need to first make sure that we've got a design in place that would work for that in the long term, and make sure that we have the right community behind it that's able to fill out and collaborate on the many, many components that need to be a part of it. So when you're going back and filling out these working group forms, or if you want to reach out to me directly and express, me or anybody on the team, I should say, directly, and express an interest in being part of what Salt Cloud needs to look like in the future, I've got a lot of designs and a lot of concepts that I think could allow us to make something which would be more powerful than anything else that is currently on the market when it comes to automating cloud. But again, when I look at the overall resources that I've got right now, the need to dedicate our engineering resources on Salt, and the need to dedicate SaltStack's company resources towards deepening our profitability as a company, I just want to be very careful about engaging in cloud without making sure that we've got a really strong community back. So again, if people want to dive into this, then I would be thrilled to sit down with a Salt Cloud working group, assuming again that we can find a captain, assuming again that we can find good people who want to be part of this, and share that vision so that we can sit down and determine what a really powerful roadmap moving forward is. And in a nutshell, I don't think this is the right forum for me to just blast out 18 different, architectural ideas and ping them back and forth with people. But I think that if we find that group and that group is interested, that we could make a serious dent in that problem.
What are the major features planned for Neon?
So right now, the major goal inside of Neon is to make sure that we have full support for all dependencies that are newer around Python 3 and preparing for the Python 3 release, being focused entirely on Python 3 moving forward. So that's number one. Number two is to get iNotify support in for the iNotify beacon across multiple operating systems. That was one other major initiative. Another major initiative.
Tornado.
Tornado is part of that first one, is that we clean up the Tornado code so that it works with Tornado 5. We're deeply engaged in that right now.
And the Red Hat 8 support.
Yeah, and Red Hat 8 support. Thank you, Kavya.
Max Arnold says salt call runtime is getting higher, especially on Py3, probably because there are lots of modules that are loaded. Are there any plans to measure, improve the CLI performance?
So, that's a good question. And we've spent a fair amount of time looking at that. And when we go back and, to be honest, we haven't done heavy performance tests there for a little while. There's a lot of different options that we can take for modifying the performance of the salt call command. So, in a nutshell, yeah, we would definitely be interested in making that go faster. But to do it, what we need to do is get a really good profile of where those problems really are. Generally, when we've gone back and we've profiled the loader's been really fast. And the lazy loader aspect of the loader has been very, typically hasn't been the bottleneck. Usually what we've run into as a bottleneck here has to do with the fact that when we import utilities, we end up importing a lot of additional dependencies, and then Python's import process itself is actually pretty slow when we're dealing with really large file trees. But again, the right thing to do there is to profile it again, make sure that we've got a really clean view of where our liabilities are and how to take care of those. Another thing that we have been doing to increase that performance in response to the fact that we got evidence that it was because of utils loading too many dependencies is that we have been moving many of those utils out of the dunder init file inside of utils so that we don't have as many dependencies getting loaded when we initialize. But again, that is definitely worth a profile, a really explicit look at what's going on. And as with any time that we work to optimize the performance of code, we should always do it based on profiling and make sure that we're not making the wrong assumptions.
So the next question is from Austin Pack. Are there any thoughts around the core working group?
Oh, we would love to have a core working group. And yeah, honestly, I think that would be fantastic. I think that would also make a lot of sense when it comes to making some of those core decisions about things like release process, development process overall. And so if we have people who are interested, again, in participating in or seeing the group, I'm all on board. Really with this, we need to see how many people would be interested in what groups and what aspects of SALT's development. And as we gauge that interest, then we know how much we'll be able to work with the community to move these things forward. But my long-term goal here is that we have direct community access and potential ability to modify and captain every part of the SALT code base.
The next question is from Nick. Not sure if this is a good question for this forum, but I'm curious if there's interest in typing after Python 2 is deprecated. Typing in the type annotation sense.
We definitely want to add typing. So if we step back and we look at the Python 2 deprecation, the number of features that are available in Python 3 it's frankly staggering, right? I mean, there's just a lot of really glorious stuff going on in there. And so with the Sodium release, according to the SEP, which has been ratified, when we drop Python 2 support, we're going to be pegging at Python 3.4. Now, moving forward, it seems that the vast majority of new Python code seems to be pegging around 3.6. We're pegging at 3.4 for the Sodium release primarily because that's the version that we currently support anyway inside of our Python 2 to Python 3 migration or dual support that we set up a number of releases ago. So as soon as we're on Sodium and we can reasonably start implementing typing, we would definitely encourage the addition of typing in older code. But I also think that the right thing for us to do would be to open an SEP and what we want our long-term typing policy to look like. And I imagine that's going to be a pretty lively discussion, right? But yeah, we definitely want typing. I mean, I should probably add that once we're moved over to Python 3 and we're able to peg on a version higher than 3.4, I think that we should start also looking at things like potentially moving away from Tornado and implementing native Python coroutines across the stack. There's really a lot that we can do there. But yeah, thank you for prefacing that with this might be a question for another time, because we could go into some pretty extreme depth. But we'd love to be able to get that stuff in there, and I think that it would help. It would help Salt in many ways.
I don't see other questions.
Yeah, we'll probably give a minute for questions to come in. And in the meantime, I want to make one more quick announcement for Neon. We just recently announced the feature freeze in the Slack community. The feature freeze will be on June 6th. It's a month from now, but make sure your PRs get in there that you want to get into Neon. Make it in time.
Nick also wants to know if a significant deepened integration planned with Kubernetes and OpenShift.
So we do have quite a bit of integration into Kubernetes, and I mean, given the size and scale of that project, that's a big deal. It would potentially be worthwhile to consider a Kubernetes working group. When we come back and we look at Kubernetes and Salt as a whole, I think that there are many very unique opportunities that we have to not only manage the setup and deployment and security of Kubernetes deployments, but also to be able to dynamically orchestrate multiple Kubernetes deployments. And I would really love to be able to see deeper integration into projects, not only projects like OpenShift, but also similar projects like SUSE's CASP project. And similarly, when we come back and we look at cloud, the ability to integrate with not only cloud Kubernetes-based deployments, but also serverless frameworks. Again, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to use those core automation paradigms inside of Salt to facilitate the normalization of things like serverless frameworks and things like large-scale container deployments. And I think that overall, that view of Salt, from being able to look at containers in a very direct way and introspect containers that are actively running, to be able to detect things like, wow, I let a stale container out there for too long, all the way up to Salt states being produced that allow us to facilitate deployment and management of serverless platforms, is a very worthy goal for us to look at as a project overall moving forward. How will Salt adapt to serverless environments? That's a really deep question. Let's see. I mean, I already mentioned that I think that the overall deployment of code inside of serverless environments is a critical thing that Salt can be a part of. But I also think that Salt it would make sense for Salt to be able to deploy. How do I put this? Again, I mean, this is a really complicated question because what we're looking at right now is that the overall kind of diversity of what's happening inside of the data center is I mean, it's reaching a point today that is, I mean, almost just downright ridiculous. Because I mean, we're ending up looking at multiple deployment and management styles and models that have been put out there, and those management styles and models are things like serverless containers, classic management, and one of the things that I was betting on years ago with cloud in general was that hybrid cloud and multi-cloud would end up being a paradigm moving forward. And I'm kind of astonished at how much that has been the case. Moving forward, frankly, if I put my money on things and look at the industry as a whole, I think my bet is that serverless allows us to simplify the deployment of code to such a degree that I think it will also allow us to simplify what our overall dependency on all of the different cloud providers is. I think that as we move forward, a classic situation that we've seen in computing for a very long time is kind of this yo-yo and boomerang effect, where old models rekindle into new paradigms. And so I think, my money is on that when we look at serverless, we're going to see things like these existing storage that are out there that are creating on-prem storage solutions are going to continue deepening their commitment, but also serverless platforms. And that's going to allow us in many ways to simplify what deployments look like. So I guess I'm being ridiculously roundabout here. Where Salt plays in that is that we're going different aspects of development and maintenance pipelines needing to be automated. The core tenets of automation that we have in Salt should be part of that. And with that said, I think that if we can get the Salt community moving in a healthier way, and I think that will free us up to be able to deploy and create new models and new additions to Salt in the future that will address that. And I've got a lot of ideas around that I'm still working on, and that I would love to be able to work on in conjunction with the community as we get closer to being able to realize them.
If I may also add, Tom, to the question of serverless and the use of Salt and its automation platform, in a more immediate fashion, if you look at projects such as OpenWhisk and a lot of what's happening around some of the serverless paradigms, the behavior that we start to observe is that people are essentially creating many functions at a much rapid rate, which in a sense is creating more complexity around the underlying infrastructure. If you are a service provider, you typically are relying on automation and configuration to be able to set up much of that underlying componentry that would support that rapid rate of a microservices style architecture. But more importantly, when it comes to compliance, you really are starting to try and understand how people deploying these functions are essentially having to do traceability between the deployed function and the changes in the underlying environment. So today what we see are providers of serverless platforms leverage technologies such as Salt to actually mediate and scale that.
Okay, the only other question that popped up was, and then I'll go ahead and close up after this one. The only other question that popped up was, do you think proxy is a good overlay for this? To be perfectly honest, I think that's very plausible. but I think that that's probably something when it comes that. How do I put this? It's probably something worth a little more research. I want to be really careful about saying something that makes everybody think that right. I think that the way forward is X. When I think there's definitely some more research that should be done. But I do think that the proxy model is something that could very plausibly be applied to both the management of single functions as well as collections of functions relative to two dedicated serverless interfaces. Yeah. Okay, so we're running out of time here, but I just want to emphasize that this is a massive shift for SaltStack, the company, and Salt, the community, for us to be bringing in these working groups and trying to create a cadence specifically around a more democratic process for community management and bringing the community directly in. We've never done anything in the past to do things like give community members direct merge rights and bring them into the roadmap like we are now. And I can't tell you how excited I am to have honestly finally gotten this over the line and finally gotten to the point where we can actually deploy and change the fundamentals of how we want to be managing things moving forward. My hope is that there's a number of things process-wise that we can internally clean up and prepare for this as we move forward with the Neon release. And again, I mean, it's been asked what's the goals with the Neon release. A lot of it's just prepping the work for the future so that we make sure that we've got a platform that when we have these working groups, they can work really well with. I also, given the questions, I can't tell you how excited I am with a lot of the ideas that are being brought up. There's quite a bit that I would love to be able to re-engage the community on when it comes to serverless systems and honestly the new view of how infrastructure should be developed moving forward, but also like Mo was saying just a moment ago, being able to look at the fact that these new models that are being produced, while they are speeding up one aspect of the infrastructure, also presenting a lot of new liabilities. And in the of those new liabilities, we see definite opportunities around automation. At the end of the day, we create new abstractions, and this is one of the core principles that I really believe in, and that is that we create new abstractions to facilitate automation. But the abstractions that we create to facilitate automation subsequently tend to facilitate additional complexity because they allow us to do so much more. And what we're dealing with is an asymptotic complexity relative to the amount of features and relative to the amount of code and deployments that we are able to produce. And that we need to step back and understand that that curve is accelerating at a particular pace and that we need some really amazing automation to be able to get into the next level and the next view of what things should look like. And again, I'm really excited to be able to sit down and talk about your ideas and some of my ideas as to how we can not only continue to shepherd the SALT project forward, but begin to look at what open source projects SaltStack and the SALT community can start to produce, which have a really targeted and positive effect on how we can solve a lot of these emerging problems. So thank you again for everyone who's come to participate, and look forward to our future. What's this thing called? Office hours. My mind has been deep in how do I eloquently answer questions. I'm really looking forward to our future office hours discussions and looking forward to working directly with these working groups. I can't tell how excited I'll be to personally sit down and work with these working groups, make sure that everyone here is as empowered as they can possibly be to move forward, but also be able to sit down and work through what our next generation of these fundamental designs can look like. Okay. Thanks, and we'll see you all in a month.
Thanks everyone who joined in.